Okay, well, the idea of risk management has grown quickly in the past 5 to 10 years. I mean, I think we first heard consultants start talking about it, maybe 10, maybe not quite 10 years ago, but maybe 6 or 7 years ago for certain.
Yeah, probably around 2009.
Greg Hutchins, I think.
Yep.
It has particularly come to the fore, the idea of risk-based thinking being included in the latest version of ISO 9001 2015. So, the idea is, what kind of came to my mind is, has our idea of risk changed? If it has changed, how has it changed? Why has it changed? And to answer that question and a few more, we have with us Tim Lozier, Director of Marketing for EtQ. Hi, Tim.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me.
As I said, I think traditionally when people considered risk, it was the risk of making or shipping a defective product, so it was kind of very product oriented. But I think today's concept of risk is much broader than that. Is that right? And if so, can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about it, we live in a much more complex marketplace. There's, global organizations, there's mergers and acquisitions, there's more moving pieces than ever before, and product life cycles that are much faster, to the tune of months versus years. And so in all this speed and rapid pace of business, we're expected to keep quality and compliance, and we're expected to make sure we're benchmarking our compliance at every step. And so what happens is we need to find a way to really enroll the entire organization in compliance. And you look at the silo of compliance, you look at the silo of quality. Not everybody speaks quality. Not everybody speaks that language, but everybody speaks risk. Risk is a universal language. It's a universal translator for all the operational areas. And so as we move through this, risk is becoming more of a standard benchmark and more of a process for us to be able to really assess and identify hazards and assess the probability of those hazards, and then take action in a systematic, repeatable, objective way that will impact the entire organization and not just one area.
Well, Tim, you're talking about a broad view of risk, and I think that is the view of risk that most of us need to take these days. So has that broader view of risk affected the way that we and our organizations out there assess and measure risk?
Well, it has, and it hasn't at the same time. And what I mean by that is that I think that the overall process in which we identify and mitigate risk is changed a little bit because it does take that broader look. And if you start to look at what ISO 9000 2015 standard is doing, it's really trying to enroll more people in the organization to quality. And so what that's been doing lately is allowing us to create a more broader scope of risk, and to really not just look at it from one silo, one area within the business, and actually go through the process that we have seen, where you're identifying your hazards, you're mitigating risks, and you're taking action, but doing it on a much grander scale. And so I think what a lot of companies are struggling with right now, or maybe not struggling, but they're looking towards, is where do I start? Where do I go and begin this process of risk management if I haven't already done it before? And there's a lot of ways that that ISO has been able to help with that. They've actually outlined some best practices, and also there's a lot of material out there and a lot of industry information on how risk is now becoming a stronger and more prominent dynamic within overall operations within any company, big or small.
Can you give us some examples? Just kind of getting back to my first point is where we traditionally looked at risk in terms of, let's say, product risk. I mean, are there some examples you can give that are in other parts of the company, whether it's supply chain or procurement, or how are people bringing in the idea of risk into these other parts of the company? If you have some examples.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So a couple good examples, one being supply chain. So you certainly have a much longer and more involved supply chain. And, one of the biggest issues, and you've seen in the news a lot, is when you have a recall or you have an issue with the product, it tends to involve a lot of supply chain issues. A lot of times when you have these types of recalls, the supplier is really where the issues were found. But ultimately, the brand owner is liable for that recall. So being able to identify risk in your supply chain is one area. Will help you to mitigate on the front end, so that way you're minimizing risk on the back end. You also look at other operational areas, so not necessarily just within the supply chain, but you look at health and safety as an example. You may look at training, you may look at financial. In some cases, a safety incident may have a high risk that could relate to potential product failure. So if you have an unsafe working condition and you are not mitigating the risk there, you could lead to production issues where you have the safety incident that causes the production line to stop. And so you really have to take a broader look at not just what's going on within the one production line or manufacturer of products, but you have to look at risk as a whole. What are all the mitigating factors that you're going to see that are going to contribute to your ultimate risk and ultimately the bottom line, which is getting your product out, staying up with the pace of business, and make sure you keep quality and compliance at the forefront of everything you do. And that's something we're going to be talking about in the webinar next week.
Exactly. And are you seeing, in your experience or EtQ's experience, are you seeing that companies are becoming more aware of this broader concept of risk, or are most still kind of locked into a very narrow idea of it?
Well, it's funny because a lot of people are actually seeing the need for risk. They are identifying that that risk is becoming this new dynamic of benchmarking compliance. But the biggest question that we always get, and I always have is a lot of people ask, where do I start? So I know I need to do risk. I know that it's important, and I really want to start down this path, but where do I start? How do I identify all my risks? Where do I go from there? And once I have identified them, what am I doing to measure them? Is there there's some secret sauce here that I have to figure out to learn the dynamic of risk? And without giving too much away, the answer is that it's a lot simpler and more straightforward than you may imagine. There's a lot of ways that you can go about implementing a risk-based process that encompasses the whole operation, but it's not going to require you to reinvent your existing processes, but just enhance them with the proper identification, proper assessment, and the proper actioning of potential risk within your organization.
Okay, well, Tim Lozier, Director of Marketing for EtQ, thanks for joining us this morning. And like Tim said, yes, we're going to be talking about a little bit of that secret sauce that goes into making risk work for you, risk management work for you in your company. Next week at the webinar, Risk Management Primer, getting started with risk. Primer, with getting started with risk in ISO 9001 2015. That's next Tuesday, September 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern and 11 a.m. Pacific. Tim will be the presenter on that, our subject matter expert, and I will be there to field questions from the rather large audience that is going to be attending this webinar. So if you're interested, be sure to go out there and sign up and join us next Tuesday.
That's right.
And Tim,
right,
thanks
guys.
for joining us. Yep.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, Tim. We'll see you on Tuesday. Yeah, good webinar there coming up, Dirk. And a lot of you have already registered for that one, so make sure you get there early.
Because you may not get in.
It's going to be a great webinar, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. So Tim will field your questions. If you have any questions about risk and the secret sauce of how you have to deal with risk in your organization, make sure to check that one out on Tuesday.